There was also an incident with...
during the rescue efforts, Terry Icky was there. A doctor showed up, Dr. Plumley. His office was down the road. As soon as he saw the mushroom cloud, he loaded up the station wagon full of medical supplies, and he sped down to the Murrah building and started rescuing people, started administering first aid and triage. He was approached by an ATF agent who asked Dr. Plumley to put a bandage on his head and his hand, although there was no injury. He was asking the doctor to put a prop on him. Dr. Plumley lost it. He was dealing with people who were dying, and he's got this ATF agent in front of him asking him to give him a costume, and he chewed out the ATF agent. Dr. Plumley later started collaborating with Terrence Icky in their quest to find out exactly what had happened in Oklahoma City. They were both there. They both had questions. Terrence Icky was Officer of the Year. He's getting ready to see the Medal of Valor when he died. And after Terrence Icky died, the FBI raided. Dr. Plumley actually later died in a plane crash under somewhat mysterious circumstances in Texas. After Terrence Icky was murdered, which we know he was murdered, the FBI raided his bank without a search warrant, and they took out the contents of the safety deposit box that he shared with Dr. Plumley. And they did this without a warrant. I guess the bank just caved, and they didn't want to deal with the FBI. They don't want to stand up to him. I've been told by people who were involved in the investigation that Terrence Icky had acquired a videotape from evidence, and that was what was in the safety deposit box, and the FBI took it. It's gone.
It's amazing. Can you imagine them torturing that police officer to death? These are really nice people.
He fought to death. There was, in that car where they found his blood, there was another blood type. So Terrence Icky fought.
And, we're really grateful even, to his family, everybody that was involved with the documentary to try to get the story out about Terry, because I think we need...
Yeah, when he even left the house that day, he said they were after him and stuff. I mean, imagine you leave your house, they're after me, and then you're dead. It's all suicide.
He had told his family, he knew that he was under threat. He had told his family that if they ever find him dead of a suicide, that he's going to do it like this. He knew how to do it. He was a cop. He'd responded to many suicides. He knows how the right way to kill yourself. He told them, I'm going to do it like this. If it's not like that, I didn't do it. It wasn't him. He didn't do it.
Now, in addition to that, there's a lot of new information that's coming out through Jesse Trentadue. His efforts have just been amazing. We've spoken before about the death of his brother that really spurred his need to get to the truth of that, which led him to the Oklahoma City bombing. And I think PatCon is one of the more interesting aspects of what he has uncovered. At the time of the Oklahoma City bombing, the FBI had sting operations going on where they had infiltrated supposed Patriot groups, and this was called Patriot Conspiracy, or PatCon. So they had PatCon Group 1, PatCon Group 2, all over the country. And we're not able to find any documents about it being in Elohim City, but that was a white separatist compound where we know that Timothy McVeigh was operating.
And he was traveling around creating the legend so they could then set up a Patriot group with the bombing. He was going around creating that history.
I've talked to people who Tim McVeigh approached before the bombing, and they were like, who is this Fed? Because he's just talking crazy talk, talking about rising up against the government and bombing things. People who were smart and not federal informants were staying far away from him. But he had the company of a lot of other federal informants. PatCon is breaking now. J.M. Berger of IntelWire put out an article, I believe it's in Foreign Policy, and it's on PatCon. Patriot Conspiracy. And as one FBI agent said, PatCon will get you killed. They do not want this exposed because they were not only infiltrating all of these so-called militia groups, they were inciting them to crime. They were being fed weapons from military bases. Those guys weren't stealing weapons from the military. They were being fed weapons because one of the gun stores that we found out was involved with Fast and Furious just recently was involved in PatCon back in the mid-90s. It was an ATF operation. They were using the same operation. They were feeding guns to these militias to manufacture a threat to start a fight so they could crack down on them.
Now, Newsweek was going to do an article several months ago that was going to cover all of the PatCon information. The author of it, called Jesse Trentadue, read it word for word. It covered all the information. When it hits the newsstands, every mention of PatCon is completely removed.
We talked to that Newsweek writer. We sent him a copy of the movie. He asked for it. He liked it, but he told us he can't cover it. There's no way.
Amazing, gentlemen. Continue more with the PatCon.
Well, PatCon is breaking now. That article came out yesterday on IntelWire by J.M. Berger. He does a lot of good work. And it talks about Andy Strasmeyer, who we mentioned before, who Jane Graham goes into at length on the Prisonplanet.tv interview. Strasmeyer was down in Texas, and we talked about in the movie the fact that Strasmeyer had to leave Texas and come to Oklahoma because he'd been followed by the Texas Light Infantry, because Strasmeyer was down there talking about blowing things up and shooting people. And, you know, when people do that, they're either morons or they're federal informants. Either way, you need to stay away from them. So they became suspicious of him, and they started following him, and they followed him into the Fort Worth Federal Building. He went there at night, after hours, through a side door, and used a key code to get into the door. After that, Strasmeyer was told to leave Texas, and he did, wisely. And he came to Oklahoma City and started scaring them, telling them that they're going to be the next Waco, and started inciting them to commit some type of crime. And most of them were reluctant. And in fact, the only reason that Terry Nichols, the only convicted accomplice to Tim McVeigh, the only reason I believe that Terry Nichols is in prison as the only accomplice is that Terry Nichols was the only person working with McVeigh who was not a government informant.
Another piece of information that came out through Jesse Trentadue is that the CIA actually had a satellite pointed at Elohim City the day of the bombing. Now, back then, it took weeks of coordination to move those satellites around. Why was it pointed there that morning?
Elohim City is a community of like 100, maybe 200 in the 90s. It's not very big. There's no walls or anything. It's just a collection of housing. And why did they have a satellite from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, an agency we had never heard of until this document came out? The CIA ordered them to point that satellite at Elohim City in eastern Oklahoma, where McVeigh had been hanging out, but yet they will not release any of that footage, of course. They cited national security reasons.
Well, it is national security for Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, J.P. Morgan Chase that have hijacked the country to stage stuff and blame it on real Americans. It's very simple. They commit crimes to then blame us. Here is a clip from last night's hour-plus interview with Jane Graham. She says it's the last interview she's doing, talking about threats to witnesses. Again, she worked in the Alfred P. Murrow building, and she witnessed so much. That's in the full interview. But here is the threats to witnesses, because this is even more proof of the criminal elements at the top of the Justice Department and FBI, ATF, running this operation with foreign nationals, Operation Demonize American Patriots. That's basically what it is, and here is a clip.
A friend of mine and also another person, Debbie Nakanashi, worked for the U.S. Post Office. She was intimidated. She saw what went on outside with the bomb squad and everything, and she was told by her employer that if she spoke about it or talked about what she saw, she would be fired. I told her immediately to go to the union. She did, and then they came in, and then the boss came back, and then an attorney came back from the telephone company and said, well, Post Office, you don't have to, you're not going to lose your job. But, I mean, she was
one of many witnesses that saw the bomb squad across the street at the courthouse prior to the bombing that morning. And when she tries to speak out about it, her job is threatened and she's told to be silent.
Yes. And when I went, Debbie Nakanashi and I went up to Washington several times. We tried to get the politicians in Washington, the senators and congressmen, to talk to us about the bombing. Not one person there would talk to either one of us. The only person who talked to us was the representative from Ohio. And he subpoenaed... Trafficant. He subpoenaed the records from GSA. And when we went down there, we met, he was in office and his assistant, and talked to him about, what was going on. And the assistant had told, it was very interesting, that FBI had called and told him he could not open one of those boxes until they had sent people down there to redact all the information. And he said, no. He says, that's beyond your authority. I will allow one person to come down and do what they can do, and that's it. And he said that one man, I believe it was a gentleman, came down. He was doing that, and he was told, we will get you for this.
And they did. I mean, it's obvious. They took him down with a scandal.
Did. Yeah, they really did. And it wasn't like he was the only person who's created a scandal. My God, look at the felons that are in Congress right now. Don't tell me about scandals. You know, look at what's going on right now in our government. That's scandal.
Exactly.
So, I mean, he wasn't the only individual. And I'm not saying it's a Democrat or Republican. Both have the problem. But it is a real concern. Charles Key, you know, he's had his share of problems. Terrence Shakey, I met Terrence. I knew him. I knew his ex-wife. When he was having the problems, when he had reviewed his report and turned in his first report at the police department to his supervisor, he was told to take it right back, cut it down. He didn't want all that information in there. Terrence refused. He rewrote it, but he refused to do what he said. He was taking a copy of that out. He talked to his wife and told her he was concerned for his life.
He was concerned for his family, too, and a lot of his efforts to protect his family.
Two children he had, and they were supposed to leave. I believe the night that he was murdered, he was supposed to come back and take them down to Texas. They were going to, I believe, get remarried.
Yeah, see, he had reconciled.
Because of the children. Yeah,
right.
with the
he had
children.
reconciled with his wife.
Yeah.
He had gotten a promotion. He was getting the key to the city.
Right.
He had everything to live for, and his death was declared a suicide. Now, the parameters around that is that he had supposedly cut his wrists in his car, cut his neck, and then, I guess, tied a rope around his neck, handcuff marks, and dragged himself a mile away out into a field, and then shot himself with a small caliber weapon at a downward angle through the top of his head that came out his jaw, far enough away that it didn't leave powder residue on his head. And then the sheriff's department, when they do arrive, they do a thorough search of the area. They cannot find the weapon because it was federal property. When the FBI lands, here's the weapon. They immediately go and find it. The sheriff's department had also reported that there were 2 boxes of documents in the back of his car, and then whenever it gets to the impound lot, it's not actually part of the inventory.
Well, also, he had left his video camera at his home. And right after that, the police department comes to her home, Terry's wife's home, and bursts in. No knock, no nothing, just barges in, goes directly, where is the camera, where is everything? She said, where's your warrant? They went in, they searched everything, took everything that they wanted, and walked out with it. And that had a lot of evidence, I'm sure, on it.
Yeah, I mean...
And he died with nothing. They left him nothing. They gave them nothing, you know, and they call this... You know, that he should have been able to have a pension and do for that. They didn't even have the courtesy to call and do those things.
And every police officer that dies in Oklahoma City gets an autopsy. Terrence Shakey did not get one. They didn't ask his family if he had ever had suicidal comments or thoughts. And when they question the suicide, they say, "Oh, you watch too much television. You're acting crazy. You need to go back home and stop worrying about it." And this is not a way to treat a hero that saved 8 people's lives that day.
Well, Terry also had, Terry's wife said that she had a call from one of the policemen that he worked with, that he had talked to Terry the day before, and he said the feds were after him. They were following him. And he said, I've been told that I cannot tell you that I know he was in fact murdered by them because they've already told us if any of us talk, we're dead, our families are dead. That was not enough.